What are you doing? That's my point. What are you doing to make sure that this word of God gets the opportunity to move in their heart when you know the truth? I told you I'm messing with you. And now let me tell you a methodology. These children, these Hebrew children, they created a system for remembering the word of God. It's in Psalm 119. And I want you to go there because you are a recipient, you are a beneficiary of their system. Some of you know it, but many of you don't know it. You don't know what system they put in place because you haven't dug. I'm going to help you a little bit with it because their interest was to please God not only for the present generation, but for future generations. Some of these things you already know. You know that the children of Israel, the Hebrew nation, were persecuted, but they had a word. And that word, all of them are connected to the name of God called Jehovah. Some of these things you already know. I told you I'm talking about generals, and then I'm going specifically with the system. But I want to tell you some of the things you already know. The Word of God, ladies and gentlemen, must be experienced. Because if it's not personally experienced, listen to me closely, it's just head knowledge. It's got to get out of this book and into your heart. It's got to get out of this book and into your feet, into your hands. As it did the children of Israel. When they were persecuted, they had a word from God. God became visible. He became Jehovah Nissi, the God that went before them in victory. When they had sickness, there was a word from the Lord. He was called Jehovah Rapha. He became the God that healed them. When they didn't have any resources, he became Jehovah Jireh. You remember that? For Abraham and his child and Isaac, he became the provider, the one that they could then see. That's what Yireh or Jireh really means. Or they needed everything. Then God became the El Shaddai. If they wanted to be right before God, he became Jehovah Tsidkenu, the God who is their righteousness. Why did I bring that up? That's not an intellectual exercise alone. It is what you do, and when you study the Word of God and you wonder, well, where did that Rapha come from? How does that apply? They had problems, and they sought God, and they characterized God by a name. And that's what I want you to see when they did and created a memorization system. Somebody said memorization is the motherhood of learning. The more you embed the Word of God in your heart, the more you will remember it. It'll come out of your mouth if you want it to. You know what I learned as I studied Proverbs and I studied the life of Solomon? I learned a lot that it has a lot to do with will. What do you have a desire to do? Do you really want the Word of God? Or do you just want what God can do for you? That's the case with many people. They just want the benefits of God, but they don't want to work for God. Now, I didn't say that you have to work for salvation. Jesus did that. But some of the blessings of God that maketh rich and add no sorrow to, you have to work for it. Where do you get that? In Philippians chapter 2, verse 13, 12 and 13, he says, work out. Did you hear what I said? Work out, not work for, work out your own deliverance. That's what salvation means. For it is God who what? Worketh in you, both the will and the doing of his good pleasure. Did you see how it started? You need to work out what God has already worked in. But unless you work it out, you won't know what he worked in. It takes effort. It takes study. It takes dividing the words of truth. Look at this. They institutionalized the Word of God so that it became a God for all seasons. He became a God for all seasons. They didn't have any leather Bibles. They didn't have any computers or they didn't have any smartphones. They created a memory system that could be passed down to every generation orally. How do they do it? I told you to go to Psalm 119, did I not? Turn there. As you and I have 26 letters in the English Bible, they had 22 letters in the Hebrew language. And all of them are in Psalm 119. I want you to examine this. You won't have time to go through it all now, but it's going to be fascinating to you when you go home and you study this 119th Psalm. Because it is the longest psalm in the Bible. It is the longest group of scriptures in the Bible. But look how it's divided. 22 groups of verses preceded by one of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. You'll see the little Hebrew alphabet at each of those segments. Each segment, ladies and gentlemen, is 8 verses each, totaling 176 verses. They created that. But created it for what? So they could remember the Word of God for every situation in every season. And I'm going to give you some examples of it. It's in your handout. And it took creativity. It took the initiative of people. Say it with me. It took work. Say it took work.